Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Gallery. My name is Nuke, and this is Art of the Cards. This series is fundamentally focused on grading the art of Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards, looking at the aesthetics of the art, how it syncs up to the effect, and how it relates to the card name. We work through archetypes in alphabetical order, starting at a random point, which was in this case you. So, after we outplayed the ultimate athletes in our first video, we get to move on to the archetype of monsters relating to one of the protagonists of Yu-Gi-Oh! No, not Yusei, Jaden, or even the king of games himself, but in fact, the most controversial protagonist of them all, Yuma Tsukumo. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's shout! Like an idiot, fuse with a blueberry and take a look at Utopics. So, the first monster we'll start out with is, of course, the base monster, number 39, Utopia. This is the boss monster of the protagonist, and as it is, it looks pretty cool. It resembles an archangel more than anything else, with the giant wings on its back, and the white and gold color scheme that denotes both purity and strength. It's done in a very traditional action pose, surging forward in order to strike at his enemies with his sword. Wrapping up with the art, I like the little green gem on its chest. It adds a nice little splash of color to the card's art, which would otherwise be excessively dominated by the white and gold. The pauldrons, though, are massive, and this comes from someone who does like Warhammer 40,000. The first time I looked at this, I thought the 39 was emblazoned on a wing joint before I got a closer look. Moving on to the card name, Utopia, it being named after the Thomas More novel of the same name, is interesting when looked at in the context of the show, the word denoting a perfect society. Because one of the games played in the novel was a game of numbers, where number consumed number, which is an interesting parallel to the plot of the anime with the whole number hunters thing they had going on. This gets it some major plus points in my book, but the Japanese name, in my opinion, fits a tad better with the effect. The translation of the Japanese name is Bringer of Wishes Hope, which fits so much better with the effect being attack negation. It gives you hope by stopping a possibly fatal attack, allowing you one or two more desperate turns of life in order to draw into your chance at victory. Very fitting, because every Yu-Gi-Oh! Protagonist's power is, of course, luck-based drawing. In the end, however, this is still a nice card with some good art, and if one takes the Japanese name into effect, a very solid 4 out of 5. The next card we have is the lesser version of Utopia, number 39, Utopia Roots. This card's art is very nice in my opinion, stripping back the bulkier armored form of the base Utopia in favor of a slimmer design that shows off the blue color scheme that it apparently has instead of skin very nicely. Additionally, the artwork is almost a complete opposite of Utopia, the angle at which they are positioned being reverse, Utopia on the left side moving right, and Roots in the center but more on the right moving left. They also both have their swords in different hands, and the background for Utopia Roots has an explosion as if it was just born, rather than the background for Utopia, which seems to display a portal from which it is flying out. The effect on Utopia Roots matches nicely with its name as well, the attack increase per rank of the monster it negates, showing its growth from the root into the full Utopia. Appropriate effect with some good art means that this card also gets a 4 out of 5. The next card is number 98, Antitopian, and holy hell if this is not a massive change from the previous ones. He's tall, imposing, and the mostly inverted color scheme works, black and gold working just as well as white and gold, and the increased amounts of green we can see also works well against the darkened color scheme. Additionally, the angle at which we see the monster is changed as well. In both Utopia and Utopia Roots, we see the monster from a angle looking down. However, in Antitopian, we see it from the bottom looking up, which is a pretty basic way of both contrasting with number 39 and implying a more threatening, dominating nature. The attack and defense values are also reversed from the normal Utopia, showing its reversed nature a bit more clearly. The effect honestly has little to no relation to his name, and a more appropriate effect would have been if he destroyed monsters attacking him, a more aggressive instead of defensive effect. Instead, what we end on here is some excellent artwork, but a non-thematic effect, which means that this gets a 3 out of 5. The next card is number 93, Utopia Kaiser, and oh boy, what is that between his legs? That, my friends, is what we call a health hazard. Other than that, this bad boy's art is really cool, the angelic look of the wings being replaced by a group of 3, invoking a more seraphic appearance, which interestingly is above the angel in the Christian angelic hierarchy. In fact, like its name, Kaiser, implying rulership, a seraph is the highest rank of the angelic hierarchy. That's a really cool effect, and the art itself is also really nice. I enjoy how the rounded designs on the wings even invoke a butterfly just a little bit. Additionally, the form is much bulkier and ornate, with an excellent looking black coat which cinches at the waist and flares out from there, giving him a lot more presence. His pauldrons are once again a bit ridiculous, but that also helps to lend to his air of presence, and the belt of glowy stones around the waist is a nice offset to the blazer trenchcoat thing he's sporting. The effect is interesting, but not super appropriate, though you could make an argument that he's commanding out other number monsters out of the extra deck. So, for some amazing artwork and an effect that might work if you squinted it sideways, it gets a very solid 4 out of 5. Our next monster is number 39, Utopia Beyond, and this one is sadly probably the most generic when it comes to protag monster upgrades. While I like the whole Voltron element where it combines the forms of several of the other Utopia monsters into one form, it's just not very interesting design-wise. With the Chaos forms included, you could have made it look like Utopia Kaiser and had some black in there to liven up the color scheme and make it look like a true fusion of all its component parts, instead of just a regular upgrade of Utopia, taking only a few elements from the number C39s. Also, I'm not a huge fan of the Wolverine claw things that they decided to replace his swords with. It just looks weird to me and not at all effective. In the end, some functional if generic art and a not particularly mentionable effect gets us a 3 out of 5. Alright, now we get to see the pinnacle of the number monsters, the final one ever to be summoned in the series, and in a way, the number's boss. Give it up for number 99, Utopic Wait, that's the number's boss? The dragon that looks like its wings were colored in by a 5-year-old with some watercolors, and a body the exact shade of watery piss? It looks hideous. Being fair, the fact that it was secret where it didn't help, that just ended up blurring it a bit more, but it still looks disgusting. The color they chose for his fleshy bits just puts me off, and the tail is weirdly huge when compared to the rest of it. Its entire design is just disgusting. The armor lacks the clear white and gold color scheme that most of the other Utopian cards have, and it just completely messes with their aesthetic. If they needed to color the flesh, they should have just gone with the same blue they used with the Utopia roots. So overall, not a fan. It's ugly, it doesn't fit with the theme, and it's just so disappointing to look at. They could have done something really cool to make this look super angelic and really lent into the theme and gone all out with including different aspects of the designs, but they didn't. They just did what Konami always does when they lack ideas for a boss monster and made it some generic looking techno dragon. This gets a 1 out of 5. Now we can move on to the number S39, starting with number S39 Utopia Prime? Or number S39 Utopia the Lightning? What? For some reason they made 2 separate versions of these monsters, just with different names and artwork, and only one of them is really used. However, for the purposes of this review, we'll be taking a look at number S39 Utopia the Lightning first. Generally, it's pretty nice. I like the addition of black to the overall color scheme. It pairs very nicely with the gold, and the background has the obligatory lightning shooting everywhere, but the design itself, regardless of that, is still good. It differentiates itself quite nicely from monsters like Antitopian and Utopia Beyond by keeping a bit more of the white color scheme than the original, while keeping the black next to the gold to get that nice popping effect that happens with the contrast. The white also provides some nice accents to this as well, and while I'm not a huge fan of how the wings change, I can see how changing them from a more expansive or protecting wings to the narrower bladed ones might help better to reflect the offensive effect. Overall, a nice card with some really sick looking art. It gets a solid 4 out of 5. On to the next S39, Utopia Prime. You know, after a while looking at all of these Utopia monsters, you start to get the feeling that each was designed just to be a new monster for a specific situation, and it just escalated with the name scheme. I mean, you have Utopia Beyond, Utopia Kaiser, all the Sea Exceeds monster, which we'll cover after this, and, well, that one. But for what this is, which in my opinion is a fairly generic boss monster, it looks pretty good. The wing design isn't as evocative for me as the one of Utopia Kaiser. There's no real 8-winged angel in mythology, but the place it holds as the first Shining Exceeds monster is interesting in and of itself, and it looks good enough for all that. The color scheme is nice and evocative, and I like the asymmetric armor design they allowed for the card, as it prevents the slimmed down Prime from looking too generic. It allows for a bit more character in how it looks, and while it's a small change, it helps it just be a bit more unique. The effect itself is interesting, acting very much as a comeback all or nothing card, which fits well with the theme of hope that so suffuses the archetype's theming, and I like that it is such a balls to the wall all or nothing effect. In my opinion, some nice artwork and a fun thematic effect mean this gets a solid 4 out of 5. The final S-Utopia monster is number S0 Utopics Zexal, or Zeal, depending on how pedantic you want to be about the pronunciation. This is pretty cool, mostly because it's a fusion of Yuma and Astral together to form what in the manga is their ultimate boss monster. It got a nice design for that. The magnificent hair adds some extra cool factor, and the big laser sword is a nice touch for the ultimate monster or whatever, and probably added a nice bit of drama to the manga when the final attack was called. Barring that, the color scheme is actually quite nice, fusing the white and gold of the Utopic monsters with a darker color scheme that helps to emphasize the light of the sword, even if you can't see all of it. It looks nice. The effect is somewhat lacking thematic relevance, with it lacking a more comeback-oriented effect like the other Utopia monsters. In the end, it's a really nice design, but lacking a real thematic relevant effect, it gets a 3 out of 5. Finally, we move on to the last set of Utopia monsters, the Chaos Utopia set, starting with number C39 Utopia Ray, and wow, that is not an awkward name at all that fits better in the Japanese. In the Japanese, it's a pun on the overall Ray of Hope thing, which works pretty well in that context, especially given its nicely thematic comeback effect. However, it doesn't work so much in the TCG, where we don't have that name. We called it Utopia instead. Regardless, the color scheme is good. The black and gold helps to really pop out against each other, though in this case it seems a little grayer, only using the black as a highlight, and while the black feathered wings make it look like some lonely teen's idea of an edgy fallen angel, it does work overall with the theme. Beyond that, the tiny little hands he has sprouting from his back are kinda weird and vestigial, and look especially strange wielding that giant black behemoth he's packing in place of a sword, but it is also quite nice and portrays a more aggressive stance overall. The angle at which the artwork was drawn is from a higher angle, and the way it's drawn, with the swords coming up at the point of view, seem to imply a high level of aggression, which fits, being a chaotic version of the traditionally protective Utopia monsters. Overall, a cool card and a clear 4 out of 5. The next card is number C39 Utopia Ray V, which, being an upgrade to Utopia Ray, is quite a bit larger and much more ornate than the regular number C39. The V in its name could be either a reference to the name of the Baryons in the Japanese version of the anime, who were the Varians, or, considering the final evolution of this line, could just stand for victory. Regardless, the artwork is nice, the color scheme works well, black and dark red are always good complements for each other, and the hints of grey help to break it up here and there, and lead to the whole thing just feeling a little more textured. I do quite like the pauldrons on this one, even if it does look more than a little ridiculous, because they remind me a bit of the Steel Swarm archetype, and the classic Yu-Gi-Oh! Tiny head design rears its ugly mug again in this card. Seriously, it's proportioned reasonably well to the rest of the body, but it looks minuscule because of those massive pauldrons and the wings behind it. I'm actually pretty sure that the pauldrons are meant to form some sort of secondary helmet if the monster so wishes, but let's not get into that right now. The effect is a more powerful version of regular C39s, nothing too special here, and I find it interesting that they would go back to the multiple armed version of the design in the next card, whereas in this one, they just went with a regular 2-armed design with a large version of one of the standard swords, rather than keeping the black blade from the last version. In the end, a nice design, if a little generic, so it ends up getting a 3 out of 5. Finally, our last Utopia monster and the culmination of the C39 series is number C39 Utopia Ray Victory. This is a weird one, folks, and not just because it has a different color scheme. I'm not really sure how to grade this one, because without taking the anime into consideration, it doesn't work. It sacrifices the color scheme for no reason to go back to the white and gold, despite being a C39 monster. But if one does take the anime into effect, then it works really well, because it has meaning. In the anime, Yuma ranks this up with a transformed card, this card being Rank Up Magic Numeron Force, which transforms from the Rank Up Magic Limited Baryons Force. In this case, it works really well, purifying and changing the color scheme of the card despite being a C39 monster, and reflects a shift from using the impure Baryon cards to the clear, pure Numeron cards. In the end, I believe that considering all the context possible is good, so I'll lean towards brilliance on the side of thematic relevance. So yeah, a bit of dilemma there, but the card itself, looking at the art completely separately from the others, is okay. While the red and gold and white should work together because they all work separately, red and gold work together and white and gold work together, they can't pull it off together. Maybe it's the blue. While it isn't really present in large quantities, it shows up just enough and in just the right amounts to disrupt the coloring, and not in a good way. In the previous card, the gray was similar enough to the black that when it was introduced, it highlighted the rest of the colors without drawing too much attention to it. And in this card, the blue acts too much like a contrast, but we already have something like that in terms of the red parts on the arms and underarmor. I do like the cheekiness that it has with a giant V on its back, and it's a nice touch that adds a bit of character to the archetype, but it can't really disrupt my concerns about the coloring as a whole. Looking at the effect now, if we take my earlier decision not to pillory the card for thematic irrelevance based on the anime, we now run into a problem. While in terms of the C39 monster line it makes sense being a battle-oriented effect, it really should have a protection effect more in line with the traditional Utopia monsters. All in all, this means I can't give it more than a 2 out of 5. While the theme for the card was pretty strong initially, the art just doesn't do it to me, and the effect is just incongruent with the supposed theme. Finally, we're done with our main Utopia monsters, and now we can go through all of the support monsters. What an impossible joy. These are actually a more interesting bunch, mostly taking the form of various equip monsters, like those things that used to transform into mechs for the Power Rangers, or if we're using a reference a little more up to my speed, the Mectanium that you could put on Bakugan. Starting off, we'll be taking a look at the ZW monsters, then moving on to the 1V monster, and finally, the Soul ZS monster. Taking a look at the first ZW monster then, it's ZW Asura Strike. This card is pretty nice overall, as the Asuras in Buddhism have a much more aggressive nature than that in Hinduism, and is a nice call out to that with the artwork very faintly featuring number C39 Utopia Ray on the back. This makes sense both given the multiple arms of Utopia Ray and the attack boosting effect, which helps it to crash over stuff. The artwork in this case merely depicts a set of swords that Utopia Ray can wield, and while it's nice to see the bellicose nature of the Asuras reflected in the effect of the monster, given its attack boosting and multiple attacking effects, I would have liked to see a bit more focus on the multiple faces of the Asura, maybe giving it an extra set of arms to go up to 6, like a traditional one. In the end, it can't get more than a 2 out of 5, because while I'm a decent fan of the art, its effect I just think could have been better exploited. The next card is ZW Eagle Claw. This is a more classic variant on a Utopia monster, coming in with a comeback effect along with its attack boost. The artwork is pretty nice, if a little confusing. I was a little weirded out by how it's supposed to work, but it turns out instead of going on the feet, like I would expect of a card called Eagle Claws to do, it goes on the back, which is just a little confusing, because they could have just called it Eagle Wings, and that would have made all forgiven. Beyond that, the art is fairly nice. I like the red and gold color scheme, and the green kind of works here as a highlight, but only on the red. In my opinion, this type of green where they're trying to show some sort of light shining through it doesn't really work on the gold. The mystical creature it draws its name from is quite interesting though, and gives it some nice thematic relevance. The twin-headed eagle in this case refers not to the crest of the Habsburgs, but the Ganabarunda, the mythical twin-headed eagle of Hinduism that is said to represent great strength. This is reflected quite nicely in the effect, and does add a nice element to the theming of the support archetype, usually being reflected around magical beasts. While I'm not a particular fan of the paint scheme overall, it works well enough, it does have a very thematic effect, so in the end it gets a 3 out of 5. The next card is much better in terms of being a little running theme that they have with these weapons, being ZW Tornado Bringer, a dragon which turns into a sword. The color scheme is fine in the end, if a little dull looking. That particular shade of red may have looked better given a more vibrant color than steel to jump out against, but it works well as a concept, and I like that they took a bit of time to give some shading to the claws and horns. The background is fine, even if it does darken the card a little too much, showing the tornado mentioned in the name, and the effect, being an attack increased and effect protector, works very nice with the theme of Oriental dragons, both being protectors of the Emperor and angry deities who could and would send massive disasters on those who angered them. I am slightly annoyed that it isn't a water monster, given the fact that Oriental dragons are very heavily associated with the element, usually being representatives of bodies of running water like waterfalls. In terms of the design of the dragon itself, the horns are a nice touch considering the type of dragon this is, with Oriental dragons usually being depicted as with the antlers of a deer, and the body is nicely sinuous. I am slightly disappointed, however, that the transformed version doesn't use some version of the body as a blade, with the area below the two legs acting as a hilt of sorts. The one real saving grace of this card thematically, aside from the protection effect relating to the protection of the Emperor, is its place within a slightly larger subset of ZW monsters, being representations of the 4 guardian spirits of China and Japan. However, that also comes with some issues though. In mythology, there are 4 beings that guard the various directions: the Azure Dragon for the east, the White Tiger of the west, the Black Turtle of the north, and the Vermilion Bird of the south. While this would normally be really fun for me and probably just S it out to a 4 out of 5, in the end it can't really help much. Why do you ask? Because it's supposed to be the Azure Dragon, and this is red. A nice card, but some thematic inconsistencies that make it kind of an unfortunate downer. It gets a 3 out of 5, mostly because Konami manages to bungle their mythology quite a bit more in the next couple cards, but some thematic relevance that would have been really cool if not mishandled by Konami. Now we move on to the better version of the last card, ZW Lightning Blade. While the thematic relevance of its protection effect is lessened somewhat, the art design and theme with regards to the 4 beasts works much better here. The art design is good, with the white and black acting as natural contrasts for each other, and the gold acts well in contrast with them both. The design can be a little wonky in places, the fangs look somewhat comically oversized, but the sharp angles of the rest of the design help to make this look sleek and deadly. The background this time is a little cheesier. The artist could have done more to make this a little look less like gravel mixed with urine. It works well enough for Tornado Bringer, didn't need to be with everything else, but the lightning looks fine and it really doesn't bring down the card too much. In the end, the thematic relevance works doubles here, as it acts as the second sword for a lot of the Utopia monsters, and works especially well being the alternate version of the Dragon Sword, which would represent the east, while this represents the west. Anyway, the art and theme work much better in this version, so it gets a solid 4 out of 5. Next up, representing the Black Turtle of the South is ZW Ultimate Shield. It's a good card, the effect and design are solid given its thematic pairing, the dark purple contrasts nicely with the gold, and the background is competent and gives it a sense of solidarity that is in line with the general theme of the card, being vertical lines rather than the chaotic swirling of the other two. The one problem I have with this in the end is that it's supposed to represent the Black Turtle, with it actually being purple in the card art. Literally, this was the easiest thing not to mess up in the world, but Konami still manages to do it somehow, though I do agree that it may have been a little difficult to see the pure black out against the dark blue. In the end, not much else to say, but to give it a solid 3 out of 5 and move on. Finally, the last card in this little digressive theme is the card representing the Vermilion Bird of the North in ZW Phoenix Bow. Represented with the right color scheme this time, but with the wrong name. Because, as I said before, it is a vermilion bird in the north, not a phoenix. There is a difference. In Chinese, it is referred to as the Nanfang Zhuque, whereas the phoenix is the Fenghuang. While I admit it's an easy thing to mess up on, literally that's the only job of the translation localization team, so I don't really see how they could have messed this up. Beyond that, a nice note on the design is the fact that its arrowhead is in fact the crest of the bird, which gives it a nice bit of presence, which otherwise wouldn't be there. The burn effect is nice and thematic, especially with a fire attribute, but I would have liked the background to reflect that a little, though I do somewhat agree with the decision to have it as a blue background, just to make it seem a bit more cosmic, and a red background would have had been a little too homogeneous with the palette of the bird itself. In the end, it does get a nice little 4 out of 5. Moving on to the next somewhat thematic set of ZW monsters, we head over to Norway, land of ice, cold, and awesome mythology as our next inspiration. The next card is based on the mythical 8-legged Norse steed Sleipnir. Why does this card only have 4 legs, Konami? Konami, actually, why? So the next card is ZW Sleipnir Male, and for some reason, they took the card named after Sleipnir, the horse only known for having 8 legs and nothing else, and then made it a 4-legged horse because literally no one in Konami could even bother to research Western myths. Trust me, with a few of the cards we have left, I'm not even close to being done on this one. Anyway, that immediately is a giant flaw in the design of the thing, and disappointingly, it doesn't even transform into male, which is what its name would suggest, merely remaining as a horse for the damn thing to ride on. The effect has some relevancy, the attack boost is bog standard at this point, but I like that if it's destroyed, it's able to summon out a monster again. It gives it a good bit of theming and allows it to carry out a monster from the grave. However, for the sin of some truly awful naming and a little bit of wonky creature design, this gets a 2 out of 5. Next, moving on to the... You did it again, you stupid people. Okay, ZW Unicorn Spear. Perfectly self-explanatory. You have a unicorn, a horse distinguished with nothing but the horn on its head, which admittedly, you do have. You even have it be a spearhead to make sense with the name. But then, Konami, you ruin it by designing it with 2 massive wings at the back, ensuring that this is in fact an alicorn. While it is semantics at the highest level, it would have been so easy just not to give this thing a 12-foot wingspan and just make it a bloody unicorn. The design is still nice enough, though the white and gold color scheme would look a bit weird connected to Utopia Ray, which is the monster this is designed to equip to, that the effect is fairly standard. No piercing damage, but in the end, I can't give it more than a 2 out of 5 because the design is just so stupid. The final ZW monster, and their only Exceeds monster, is ZW Leo Arms, which, unlike every other ZW monster, is not based on a mythological creature. Instead, it is based on Leo, the constellation. I mean, hey, what's the point of thematic consistency? It's not like some overhyped pedant is gonna be ripping into you on it later. Oh wait. So yeah, in the end, while its name is somewhat inconsistent with the rest of the archetype, for Christ's sake, you just could have called this Nemean Arms and it would have had the same effect. Its actual monster effect is quite nice in terms of the attack boost, being the biggest out of all the ZW monsters, and it is appropriate for the boss monster of the ZW archetype to have. The color scheme works, and it works well in conjunction with other monsters and would pair really well with Unicorn Spear, and in the end, it gets a nice little 3 out of 5. Finally, we move on to the only SZW card, SZW Fenrir Sword, for some reason continuing their brief dalliance with Nordic myths. Weird how the one card you really would expect to have a second attack or some attack boost on the final turn instead turns out to be a searching effect that holds no real significance. The design does take after Phoenix Bow more with the gradiated blade look, but it works quite well in my opinion in creating a wolf-like image for the card. The design is nice enough, the color scheme works, and I like how they utilize the various shades of yellow to create a more textured look even when only using around 3 colors. In the end, this gets a 4 out of 5. Okay, the last ZW monster, and the one whose design I'm going to be dumpstering on the most, is kind of a shame, honestly, because aside from it not again being what it says it is, the design looks pretty cool, and I like the color scheme. However, for a monster named DZW Chimera-clad, it suffers from a distinct lack of being a chimera, because a chimera has 3 heads, a lion, a goat, and a snake, while this only has 2. The lion, I guess, at the front, and the snake head at the back, but it is missing the goat head and replaced it instead with a set of wings, which chimeras absolutely did not have. So, immediate minus points for that, because they could have just made this look pretty cool with the goat's head. I mean, you didn't even need to make it look super goat-like, just keeping the horns on a different head would have been enough. I mean, the lion head only really has the suggestion of a mane with the golden spikes, but it works well enough with the purpley black surrounding it. The effect is nice as well, the only DZW monster having an attack reduction effect for the enemy rather than an attack boosting effect. But in the end, thematic inconsistency and some really iffy notes with the design gives this a 2 out of 5. Finally, we're done with the ZW archetypes. Now we only have 3 more monsters left to go, and then we can move on to the Spell and Trap lineup. Now, the next one could have probably been included with the ZW monster, considering that it's also an equipped monster. It's V Salamander. I really like the choice of name in this card, and it holds a particular link with its effect, which is a combination of resource retrieval from the grave and burn damage. This is very nice given the traditional place of salamanders in folklore, being spirits of fire who seem to be birthed from the flames, because they would usually hibernate in rotting logs, which would then be placed into the fire and running out when the fire was lit, the dead logs seeming to give birth to fiery creatures. It ties in very nicely with the revival from grave effect, and the fire, in the medieval sense, was also considered a symbol of rebirth. The design itself of the card is really cool. I like the thing they did where they made it a V-shaped card, as it's both a callback to the name and equips to number C39 Utopia Ray V in the anime. The background is nice as well and helps to call back to the birth from flame that was attributed to most salamanders, so in the end this gets a very solid 4 out of 5. The next card we have is ZS Vantage Sage, a card I am in absolutely 2 minds about. Because on the one hand, the art looks really, really cool. I love it. I love the slimmer armored figure, the black undersuit, which contrasts so well with the white and the gold. I love the red on its back, which is just the right shade, and I love how it seems to be floating with ethereal, cosmic power as it steps out onto the field with its halberd. But at the same time, I have to recognize that this holds no thematic link with the rest of the archetypes, despite being a Z-series monster. This effect doesn't even have anything to do with protection or attack boosting or multiple attack. Instead, it focuses around banishing, which works with its name, but doesn't work in regards to the rest of the archetype. While I do love this card's art, it cannot get more than a 3 out of 5 because it's so horrifyingly limited by the fact that while it works as a self-contained package, in relation to the archetype as a whole, it fails to grasp any form of thematic relevance. Finally, we move on to their only SCW card, SCW Fenrir Sword, for some reason continuing their brief dalliance with Nordic myth. Weird that the one card you'd really expect to have a second attack or some sort of attack boost instead turns out to be a searching effect that holds no real thematic significance. The design does take after Phoenix Bow more, with it resembling gradiated blades, which works in my opinion pretty well in creating a wolf-like image for this card. The design is nice enough and the color scheme works, and I really like how they use the various shades of yellow to create a more textured look, even when only using around 3 colors in the overall design. In the end, a 4 out of 5. The last monster card is Exceed's Agent, which seems to depict some man in black looking dude jumping with a briefcase through some sort of green... what? While ZS Vantage Stage at least had some design similarity with the rest of the archetype, this shares no design resemblance at all, and the effect to equip itself would seem to place it thematically with the ZW monsters. The design itself is so hugely out there when compared to the other monsters, it breaks the theme of the archetype up. Much more so than any of the other monsters, Utopic Dragon included, this is a weird, strange card with no place in the archetype design or effect-wise. This is a 1 out of 5. The first spell card on this list is Shining Hope Road, a nice little spell that lets you resurrect 3 monsters from your grave and immediately go into a Utopic Exceeds monster. Nice and thematic, the monsters that this lets you theoretically make are the Utopia Ray monsters and Utopia Prime, which plays into it with that monster being one of the silhouettes running down from the Shining Hope Road. The artwork itself is good, the colors combine fairly well with a big light beam in the middle to make it look suitably inspiring, and the shadow on the road adds a nice bit of contrast to the card in general. The next card is Rank Down Magic Numeron Fall. The artwork itself here is somewhat lackluster, merely showing the destruction of the Numeron code, rather than being something a bit more dynamic, but the card itself works at a very basic level. The effect allows you to rank down to monsters, and the context that this was used in the show that one time kinda works, helping to beat Elephas, who was a representative of the astral world. A disappointing card overall, and honestly not one I can say much about. It gets a 2 out of 5. The next spell card is Utopia Buster. This is weird, guys. When did Utopia ever seem like he would be the type of monster to use a rocket launcher? Within the context of the art and theme itself, it kind of works again. The explosion both destroys a monster with the lowest attack, and then the resultant explosion also burns your opponent for the amount of attack that monster had. But art-wise, this is just weird. When did Utopia ever use a rocket launcher? Beyond that, the art itself, disregarding everything else, is actually quite nice. Utopia takes a very nice pose in the middle, the rocket itself is given the biggest place of prominence, emphasizing its destructive power, and the background in and of itself is all drawn back towards Utopia, both seeming to focus on him and diminish him, but also show the relative hugeness of the rocket. In the end, this gets a 2 out of 5. I honestly don't... this just... What? Their only continuous spell card is Exceed's Change Tactics, which is actually really cool. The artwork depicts the sealed form of Utopia folding into the ground for a Chaos Exceeds change, which is what this is. With the effect reading, when a Utopia monster exceeds someone to your side of the field, you can pay 500 life points, draw 1 card. It is pretty cool. It allows you to benefit off changing out your own Exceeds monsters, and the artwork itself is quite interesting. It gets a 3 out of 5. Moving on to their single quick play spell, we come to Lightwing Shield. This one is actually quite nice and works fairly well with the archetype, embodying both of the main themes and mechanics of the archetype in one spell. This one allows you to either negate an attack or double your monster's current attack, speaking to both the protective and beatstick aspects of the Utopia archetype. The artwork is nice. I like the fact that we get to see more of the protective aspects of the wings, emphasizing the angelic parts of the Utopia monsters. Some of the particle effects look a bit goofy, the random bits of star fluff make it look a bit more cartoony than I think they were going for with the rest of the artwork. as that looks more serious. Overall, I'd give it a 4 out of 5. Some good artwork with some unfortunate spots, but a really nice effect that helps to keep it around the upper echelons. Moving on to the equip spells, we come to Reverse Breaker, a card that, while is support for the Utopic line, features another monster from Yuma's deck, Go 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 Golem, which is stomping around the field, destroying spells and traps on his robot demon legs, and roasting another card with his eye laser. It works well with the effect, and I like the idea of it being equipped to a Utopia monster, lifting it off of the ground in order to destroy traps and spells. The artwork itself is very good, the beam looking a bit more uncontrolled and wild, and gives the card a nice sense of motion, along with the fraying at the edges of the card being blasted. It works well enough, and there are some nice flourishes on the artwork, but honestly, in the end, it's just slightly above average, so it gets a 3 out of 5. The next and last equipped card is Rising Sun Slash, a card whose name would have honestly worked better on a regular spell, as is standard for the attack name of a monster. The effect is honestly really nice and supersedes the art of it, which is just Utopia coming in for a big swing on his sword. While it works to a certain extent, matching the name with him coming in for the aforementioned Rising Sun Slash, the upwards looking angle makes it look a bit more opposing, but the effect is what really makes it for me. It acts both as a way to boost attack and protect monsters, or at least rewards it, playing into their thematic ideal of protecting monsters and also creating huge beatsticks to smack your opponent with. It's honestly really nice, and for that alone it would get a 4 out of 5. However, going back to the art a bit, it is a bit unfortunate. I'm not sure if it's just my monitor, but the turquoise background on the white and gold, especially with the glow stick effect that they have going on with the sword, ends up blending the art together in a way that I don't really enjoy and isn't visually distinct. And in the end, it makes the art a bit difficult to make out, which in my opinion is the cardinal sin that any Yu-Gi-Oh card can commit. Unfortunately, this will end up knocking it down to a 3 out of 5. The last spell card in their field spell is called Onomatopoeia, and is a really nice nod to this being the protagonist archetype, with the effect being both an attack increase or method of special summoning the Onomatopoeia archetype monsters that Yuma used throughout the show. The artwork itself is pretty cool, showing off all the main monsters from each of the protagonist's branches, Go 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 Golem, Gaga Ga Magician, Dododo Warrior, and Zubaba Knight, looking up at number 39 Utopia in the sky as it explodes. The art is especially nice on this one. I really like the dark blues and greens in the background, and the contrast that makes with the gold explosion above. The position of the monsters on the ground is nice as well, all looking at the sky as Utopia explodes in order to allow them onto the field. This card generally works, and as I've said before, is a nice link between Yuma's main deck and extra deck. It gets a pretty solid 4 out of 5. The trap cards start off fairly strong with the normal trap, Utopian Aura. If it does have a major issue, it's that I can't really see too much of the card, what with the giant golden flare burst in the middle and the spirals everywhere. Though it does kind of work thematically there because it's a protection effect. However, competency-ish with the thematic effect means a 3 out of 5, though if it wanted to be better, it would have been cooler to see artwork of Utopia using its wings to protect and shelter the other Exceeds monsters present in Yuma's deck. The next normal trap is a weird one called Release Reverse Burst. The art depicts Baby Trigon getting consumed by what appears to be a summoning circle in order to fuel the destruction of 2 cards, presumably spells and traps due to the effect. The art itself is really nice. I like the dark, eldritch appearance of the summoning circles, and Baby Trigon honestly looks really forlorn. It's a good card, or it would be if the effect didn't specifically tell you to sacrifice a Utopia monster instead of a random Exceeds monster like it did in the show. This is actually quite dissonant, and in my opinion at least, it would be much cooler to see number 39 Utopia chained up in the middle of the summoning circle and sacrificing his life to destroy 2 of the other cards. In the end, while I would normally give it a 3 out of 5, it's the dissonance between the effect and art which means this gets a 2 out of 5. The next card is absolutely stellar, the Door of Destiny. This card depicts the demon door that was the primary container for Astral and his memories in the form of the number cards in the show, and the art is absolutely stunning. The detail on the demonic door with the chains on it makes it look suitably menacing, and the purple glow behind it is a pretty standard but effective way of showing menace. Some really amazing art, and though I would have liked the effect better if it required you to banish number monsters instead of the Utopia monsters, it still works, number 39 being the 1 card Astral kept from his memories, and the fact that it burns and then gains attack equal to the damage is a fairly interesting effect. Overall, a 5 out of 5. We finally move on to the last card, and by far the card of the archetype in my eyes. It's Halfway to Forever, one of the coolest cards in the archetype and a great send-off card to the archetype as a whole. The art is simple, but it works that way, seeing Yuma and Astral's combined form, faces hidden behind a flash coming from the giant Emperor's key in the back. I love it, and the simplicity really helps to emphasize Yuma's figure and silhouette and his bond with Astral, with his triumphant fist to the sky acting as a nice send-off. I like the fact that we can't see his face too well, mostly so I get to avoid the ridiculous hair, but honestly, it still makes a lovely, stark silhouette and keeps the merge between Yuma and Astral looking good. The name itself is a reference to the English Zexal theme, and it's the same if you look at the Japanese version, and the effect lets you freely summon a Utopia monster, so that works as well. Overall, it's a 5 out of 5, a great card. Okay, well, that was a pretty massive archetype, and I'm honestly wondering if I'm gonna have to split this video up into 2 parts in order to keep them at manageable lengths. The card of the archetype for me at least has to be the last trap card, Halfway to Forever. A great way of showing off that less is indeed more with simple artwork that sets the tone of the card and the archetype in general perfectly. Overall, the thematic elements worked with this series rather than against it, and the art all around was pretty better, with some examples being outright outstanding. I liked that the effects generally kept to a fairly simple theme of protecting monsters or helping to create huge beatsticks, and generally the monsters kept to a similar aesthetic design, some examples notwithstanding. This archetype overall gets a 4 out of 5. It's a good archetype with interesting connections between card effects and good artwork that was fitting for the protagonist's boss monsters. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay updated on all my future videos. This is Nuke, signing out.